tell you exactly why, but I never really felt myself to be a part of my family while I was growing up. Perhaps it was because I was the oldest. Perhaps it was because I was the only girl. Perhaps it was because my biological father died when I was 6, and by the time I was 7, my mother had already remarried. There were a lot of things that happened in my formative years that I never really had the time to absorb. A lot of things that always seemed to put me on the perimeter of family life. A lot of things that made it very difficult to feel any sense of self-worth. And that's who I was for many years, an oddity, someone who never quite fit in, or to quote a line from Pink Floyd, I experienced myself as an earthbound misfit. Probably the number one question that my mother would ask me as I was growing up was, "What is wrong with you?" And before long, that became my mantra. What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? I can't even begin to quantify how much time and energy I put in to trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And I never did figure it out. So eventually, I began trying to cover it up, whatever it was. But since I didn't know what it was, that meant I had to cover up everything. It meant I couldn't afford to let anything slip out because that could very well be the thing that was wrong with me. Have you ever tried to be different because you felt that it was the only way to be accepted? The only way to be loved? Have you ever felt as though you had to hide the real you because you couldn't imagine anyone accepting the real you? It's a lot of work, isn't it? Always trying to second guess what it is that others want you to be, and then trying to be that person. But the problem with all that is that ultimately we end up losing sight of who it is that we really are. And when we lose sight of who we are, we risk losing the essence of God in whose image we were created. We risk losing the wonder and the beauty of self. It's sad. It's incredibly painful. It's the leading cause for depression. And guess what? Everyone goes through it. Because we all long to belong. We all long for the complete and total acceptance of who we really are. Yet at the same time, the very thought of anyone knowing us that completely is enough to scare the daylights out of us. What if we're not good enough? What if we're not pretty enough, or smart enough, or fast enough, or strong enough, or just enough? Period. The idea that we are never enough is pervasive because we live in a world that demands value from its inhabitants. And this world is full of people who have no problem assessing the value of everyone that they come in contact with. Actually, we all do it. But here's the problem. When we believe our own value to be lacking, we are far more apt to devalue everyone around us. In her book, The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander shows how Virginia lawmakers managed to solidify the institution of slavery by creating the perception that whites, regardless of status, had more value than blacks. These lawmakers simply gave whites a few more privileges, which benefited the indentured servants enough that they became totally committed to preserving the system of slavery in this country. What these lawmakers understood was that when we believe we are not enough, we seek to reassure ourselves that we are at least better than them. And it really doesn't matter who they are, as long as we can maintain the illusion of our own greater worth. The lawmakers exploited human weakness so that the landowners could profit from it, a practice that is still quite useful today. We see this very thing going on at our borders today. We see it happening on streets all over the country as black folks are harassed and arrested in far greater numbers than whites. We see it happening as mosques and synagogues are bombed or shot up. And we most certainly see it in churches that exclude people for any reason whatsoever. Keep them out. They're rapists, murderers, drug dealers, terrorists, and sinners. Don't let them rub off on us. But you see, here's the thing. There are things in each of our lives that cause us to tremble. Every single person harbors worries, secret fears, and haunting doubts. No matter how much we do, no matter how much we know, no matter how strong we may appear, each of us struggles with physical, emotional, and moral weaknesses. Every person lives with wounds that we hope are invisible to others and that we take pains to hide. We try to hide our worries, weaknesses, and wounds from others because the worries, weaknesses, and wounds make us vulnerable. But we all live with them. And despite all those wounds and weaknesses, heck, maybe even because of them, we are still enough. So our theme for this very special day comes from Psalm 139, where the psalmist exclaims, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." This is one of the most important lines in the Bible. In fact, I would venture to say it's equally important to love your neighbor as yourself. Because this line states that you are made by God and God does not make mistakes. It means you are not just a fluke of science or biology. Rather, it says that God formed your inward parts and knitted you together in your mother's womb. Before you were even born, God knew what your life would be. God determines how long you live, and as long as you live, you have value. From conception to death, you have precious value, and you are enough. You are enough. You are enough. And I cannot say that enough, and you cannot hear it enough, because when you know that you are enough, suddenly everyone else is enough too. Suddenly there is no need to devalue anyone else because you're enough. I will never forget when I finally heard those words for the first time ever. And I don't just mean heard them, I mean heard them. In my soul, in my heart, in my mind, and in my body. It was at a time when I wasn't sure I was going to make it through seminary, or anything else for that matter. It seemed like my whole being had crashed upon the rocks of life, and I was just one step short of being done. And it was at that very moment when my friend held me and rocked me and kept saying the words over and over again. You are enough. You are enough. You are enough. And you know, finally, those words broke through. Because someone loved me enough to keep pouring them in until I could finally hear them. I was enough. I am enough. Just as I am, without apology, without regret, because God created me to be enough. And God does not make mistakes. And when I became enough, that was when everyone became enough. So today is Open and Affirming Sunday. On October 29th, 2017, this congregation voted to become an open and affirming church in the United Church of Christ. Many thought that we were voting to openly affirm the inclusion of LGBTQ folks in our congregation, and we were, but that was only a small part of a much greater picture. Our statement declares, in the spirit of Paul's words in Galatians, we recognize, celebrate, and give thanks for the diversity in which God has created us, each in the image and likeness of God, each loved and embraced by God. We acknowledge that discrimination in any form is incompatible with Christ's example and gospel of unconditional love. We invite and welcome into this community of faith persons of every gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, mental and physical activity, age, race, nationality, socioeconomic status, faith background and beliefs, marital standing, and family structure. Therefore, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome in this house of God. We at Plymouth invite all God's children to share in all areas of its service, leadership, activities, responsibilities, and privileges. This statement means that we openly affirm and hold dear everyone, including ourselves. And that is the key to making this work. Because if we cannot see our own self-worth, then we are only paying lip service to the worth of others. When God calls us to be the church, it is to lift each other up. It is to worship side by side. It is to encourage one another and strengthen and support one another. When God calls us to be church, we are called to love one another in spite of our faults and failures. When God calls us to be church, it's a call to see each other's gifts and encourage each other to use them. It is to see when a church member is struggling and to find ways to help them grow and change. It is to see when a church member is rejoicing and to rejoice with them. It is to see when a church member is grieving and to hold them as they cry, repeating over and over, you are enough. God knows our intentions before we express them. God knows our thoughts, our origin, our end, our actions, and our motives. God knows our private stuff, our most intimate secrets. God knows us better than we are known by anyone else. God knows us better than we know ourselves. God knows our true identity, our character, and God knows we are enough. May it be with you all according to God's word. Amen. And now, let us turn to page 469 in our hymnals and rise as we are comfortably able and join together in singing, I am the light of the world.